Have you ever noticed how hard it is to change old habits through discipline and willpower? Have you ever wondered if there's a better way? When we say we're going to do something, then we don't, we tend to blame ourselves. We say we're lazy and we don't have enough willpower. But trying to create change in our lives using willpower is like trying to push a giant rock uphill. We can force ourselves to do it for a while, but eventually we're gonna run out of energy. What if there was a way to change the rules of the game to make it easier to win? What if there was a way to change the plane's angle so we don't have to work so hard and let gravity do all the work? Today I'm gonna share with you the two principles to achieve more with less effort. The principle of reveal and conceal and the principle of friction. Welcome to Mind Hacks TV. This is change your life without changing yourself. Here's the thing about habits. We've been doing things a certain way for so many years that we've programmed our subconscious mind to respond the same ways to the triggers around us. That means that if we want to create change in our lives, we need to change our environment. A few years ago, my default response to stressful situations was to buy a pint of ice cream, go home, and eat the whole thing. I tried other ways to cope with stress, but I had been using sugar for so many years to make myself feel better that I kept falling back into this old habit. But then I started paying attention to where the stress was coming from. And as I started removing many of these sources of stress from my life, I found myself eating less and less ice cream. So when I forced myself to stay away from ice cream, I failed. But when I changed my environment, I changed my life. We have a default response for every trigger in our environment. We have lunch with health-conscious friends and we get a salad. We are stressed out and we get ice cream. Our environment is full of positive and negative triggers. Positive triggers lead to desired behaviors and negative triggers lead to undesired behaviors. So our goal is to maximize the number of positive triggers we're exposed to and minimize the number of negative ones. To make triggers more or less visible, we use the principle of reveal and conceal. We reveal what we want and conceal what we don't. Instead of having ice cream staring at me right in the face every time I open the freezer, I started hiding it deep at the bottom, out of sight, out of mind. And I started putting smoothies on top, so they were the first thing I saw every time I opened the freezer. This small change alone made a massive difference. The less ice cream I saw, the less I ate. This way, I didn't need willpower to constantly fight sugar cravings because I never let the cravings form in the first place. The second principle to optimize our environment is the principle of friction. Think about trying to slide an object on a flat surface. If the surface has a lot of friction, moving the object requires significant work. But if the surface doesn't have much friction, we can slide the object easily. We want to increase friction between us and bad habits, and we want to decrease friction between us and good habits. Less friction for what we want and more friction for what we don't. Prepping smoothies in advance is an example of decreasing friction. It makes eating healthy effortless. All I need to do is add water, blend, and drink. So what about increasing friction for those things that we want to stop doing? To eat less ice cream, I started keeping it in the freezer outside the house and covering it with a lot of other stuff. Not only was it out of sight, but stepping out of the house and digging deep into the freezer to find it was enough friction to keep me away from it. Now that you know about the two principles to optimize our environment, I want to give you a few examples of how I apply them in my own life. The key to reveal and conceal is to plan triggers so we can find them in the right places and at the right times. For example, after my dentist scolded me for not flossing often enough, I started keeping floss in my car next to the ignition. This way, I see him when I start my car every morning and I can floss as my car warms up. The trigger's location is crucial. If the floss was in the trunk, I would never see it. And the trigger's timing is essential too. If the floss was on my dinner table, I would see it daily, but at the wrong time because I'm not gonna floss in the middle of a meal. When we surround ourselves with positive triggers, we start making better decisions automatically without any willpower required. I always have my water bottle next to my computer screen as a constant reminder to stay hydrated. I keep my meditation bench right by my bed, so it's the first thing I do when I wake up. The secret is to never rely on our memory. The human mind is remarkably bad at remembering stuff, so I create calendar reminders for everything I want to do. I lift weights twice a week, and my calendar reminders guarantee that I see this trigger. I like using paper reminders too. I have them on all the relevant places, next to my bed, on my mirror, office door, and even my computer's desktop. One technique I use a lot is attaching new habits to existing ones. For example, I have a cup of coffee every morning. A few months ago, I realized that I was forgetting to take my supplements daily, so I attached this new habit to the coffee habit I already had. Now I take my supplements right after brewing my coffee, and I haven't missed a single day in months. So remember, place your triggers in a place where you're guaranteed to see them at a time you're guaranteed to take action, and make sure you attach new habits to the ones you already have. Reveal and conceal is about curating what triggers we allow into our lives. Friction is about making positive triggers easy to reach. For example, I hate regular floss because I have big hands. It is really hard for me to reach the back of my mouth, so I started using floss picks. This small change removed a significant amount of friction, which led to me flossing way more often. I'm always looking for ways to make good habits as easy as possible. I keep my gym bag packed in my trunk, so it's one fewer thing I have to do before working out. Once a month, I prep the 9 supplements I take daily so they're ready for me in the morning when I need them. I keep my yoga mat next to my home theater so I can practice while watching TV. And I always have a playlist full of documentaries and tutorials to make it very easy to just press play and start learning new skills. I also bought a very comfortable meditation bench to make my daily practice more enjoyable. And I write these episodes from my favorite coffee shop after ordering the most delicious thing they have on the menu. We need to make the things we want to do more enjoyable and remove any friction preventing us from doing that. When I talk about optimizing our environment, I don't mean only our physical environment, but also the people we surround ourselves with. Some people support us in achieving our goals and others don't. People who bring us down are usually not trying to undermine us. They might mean well, but they're used to us being a certain way, and us changing brings them uncertainty and discomfort. They have a preconceived notion about who we are and what we can and can't do. So they unintentionally impose those perceived limiting beliefs on us. They say things like, "You're too old to do that," or "just accept who you are." "Money doesn't grow on trees." So what can we do about this? Sometimes the easiest solution is to cut these people off from our lives. We want to surround ourselves with people who see our potential and help us realize it. And when people don't support us, it's our responsibility to keep them at a distance. Sometimes, however, cutting people off isn't really an option, so we need to establish healthy boundaries. We need to explain to them that this is something very important to us and we need them to be supportive. I've actually been amazed at how quickly people can turn around when I communicate to them clearly and nicely what I expect from them. If this doesn't work, remember that we don't need to share every aspect of our life with everyone. I have a friend who grew up very poor and values job security more than finding purpose in what he does. Every time I started a new company, he had a list of reasons why it wouldn't work. If I had listened to him, I would have never accomplished anything in my life. This doesn't mean that I had to stop being friends with him. In fact, our friendship has been so much better since I've stopped sharing this aspect of my life with him. But although some people aren't supportive, I found that most people are. And one of the most powerful things that we can do to achieve our goals is to involve people around us to keep us accountable. I found that relying on only one person for accountability rarely works. Eventually, they forget to follow up and we're back where we started. But it's different when they join us in our goal. I work out with my friends Kurt and Mike. We meet at the gym at the same time every week and nobody wants to be the one missing a workout. That said, I found that making public commitments is by far the best way to keep ourselves accountable. When I came up with the concept for Mind Hacks, I posted to all my social media accounts that the first episode was coming out on January 2nd. When I pressed that button to post, my heart was beating so fast. I didn't have a studio or video gear or even a topic for the first episode. And I only had 6 weeks to figure out all that stuff. But I knew that once I made the commitment, I just couldn't take it back. I had to make it work. I ended up releasing that first episode on January 10th, 8 days later than expected. Do I see this as a failure? Absolutely not. It pushed me to produce the best episode I could in that 6-week time frame. It wasn't perfect, but my goal wasn't perfection. My goal is making every episode better than the previous one. We need to tell people what we're up to. We need to talk openly about what's important to us. When we know people will be checking in with us about our goals, we're much more likely to stay on top of them. When we share our goals publicly, we need to be prepared to feel uncomfortable. Until that moment, we can fail in silence without anybody noticing. Letting people in removes our safety net and can be nerve-wracking. But it works. It really works. So it all comes down to this. Do we want change, or are we committed to change? Because when we're committed to an outcome, we're willing to experience temporary discomfort to achieve permanent growth. Okay, let's recap what we learned today. To change our lives, we need to change our environment, reveal positive triggers, and conceal negative ones. Hide the ice cream and bring out the smoothies. Make sure you use reminders and post-its. Don't rely on your memory. Plant triggers in your environment so you find them in the right places and at the right times. Remove any friction between you and your desired behaviors. Make these habits as easy and enjoyable as possible. Surround yourself with people who see your potential and help you realize it. And remember the 2 principles to optimize our environment. 1. Reveal and conceal. Reveal what you want and conceal what you don't. 2. Friction. Less friction for what you want and more friction for what you don't. Today I have something special for you. I want you to have a copy of my goal tracking sheet. I created it to set myself up for success with all my goals. I use it to keep track of my progress and identify what I can conceal or reveal in my environment and how I can increase or decrease friction for each of my goals. If you're serious about making better choices, don't rely on willpower or positive thinking. You need a system. And this goal tracking sheet is a very effective way to remind ourselves what truly matters to us. So go ahead and download it now at www.mindhacks.tv/goals. I have my goal tracking sheet next to my bed, so it's the first thing I see when I wake up. Watching a video doesn't create change. Taking action creates change. It's not about the knowledge we have, but it's about what we do with it. So get your goal tracking sheet, fill it out, and post it next to your bed. We need to take the time to be intentional about the life we want to create for ourselves. Spending an hour a month figuring out our goals and coming up with a strategy to achieve them is a very reasonable price to pay to be healthier, happier, and more successful. One more thing to keep in mind. Although changing our environment is the easiest way to change our lives, it's not always possible to change everything around us. In addition to optimizing our environment, we need to optimize our responses to the triggers around us. When we design deliberate responses to triggers in our environment, we live our lives intentionally instead of constantly being at the mercy of random habitual impulses. In the next episode of Mind Hacks, I'll teach you a very powerful technique called projected reality. This allows us to program our subconscious mind to make better decisions on autopilot. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss it. If this video helped you, please hit the like button so YouTube can show it to other people like you looking to change their habits. I'm Zeke Emuzio and this is Mind Hacks TV. See you next week with a new Mind Hack.